Okay, the study of the book of Judges. We're still in chapter 1. We're on verse 8, but this is the 4th week that we've been doing this study. So if you haven't seen any of the other videos, or if you haven't been in church, or you haven't heard any of the MP3s, then you missed a lot. I'm not going to do any recap. I'm going to dispense with all the niceties. I'm just going to jump right into it. I do want to encourage you that if you're just picking this up now, it behooves you to go back and see what we've unpacked so far. Like I said, this is week number 4, and we're only on verse 8. There's a lot of stuff there. The book of Judges is very deep. I will say this, that we have talked many times about Judges in its narrative is thematic, which is to say it doesn't walk you down the road in a chronological order. It jumps back and forth from time to time, and it's just like it's expressive, and it's painting a theme. It's history, yeah. It's not allegory. It's history, but it's kind of written in a narrative that it tells a story. It tells a theme. It's important that you know that. Also, I said in times past, and I'll let you know now before we jump right in, it would be very helpful to read Genesis chapters 48 and 49. You'll see why a little bit later today, as we're starting on verse 8. But again, keep that in mind. Genesis 48 and 49, it will really help you to understand that, or at least be familiar with it, because there's a lot of backstory, and you'll find it in those chapters. Okay, sorry about that. I just want to jump right into this because there's a lot to talk about. Judges chapter 1, verse 8, and I'm reading from the New King James. Now the children of Judah fought against Jerusalem, and they took it. They struck it with the edge of the sword and set the city on fire. We've already talked about how we view violence in Scripture. We started unpacking that anyways, so I'm not going to rehash that. But I do want to talk about, the destruction of Jerusalem. Sounds pretty gruesome, and I'm sure it was. But here, what we're reading in Judges 1, verse 8, it may very well be an account of the first destruction of Jerusalem that is recorded in Scripture. When this happened, in what year, what date, what month, what time of the day, we don't know. But perhaps this is the same account that was recorded back in Joshua. If you go back and read the book of Joshua, chapter 10, verses 1 through 27, will give you a chronological, blow-by-blow account of the battle. You also see it mentioned again in reference in Joshua chapter 12, verse 10. It's what we're seeing here in Judges 1:8. We said, and I'll just throw this out here again for you, that this is your first time. Judges, it's written, it's like a tragic sequel to the book of Joshua. We've already talked about that. I invite you to look back at the other videos to get into that a little more deeper. But here, in verse 8, when we see the destruction of the city of Jerusalem, it is widely believed here in this account that Judah only took the outskirts of the city and not the fortified section of the city, if you will. Commentators are still arguing over that. I'm not going to jump into that ring. I just want to throw that out there for people who want to study and understand a little bit more of the backstory. Again, David actually once and for all took possession of the city of Jerusalem, and it's been theirs ever since. They bought it. They fought for it. They won it. They bought it. It was bought and paid for in blood, as well as monetary terms. If you look it up, see it's 2 Samuel chapter 5, verses 6 through 9. David conquered it again. He paid for it, and so on and so forth. Jerusalem, all that to say this, Jerusalem belongs to the Hebrew race, to the Jewish people. It belongs to Israel. Let's just keep moving on. Verses 9 through 10, if you will. And it's talking about fighting in Jerusalem. And it says, and after they fought for Jerusalem, the children of Judah went down to fight against the Canaanites who dwelt in the mountains in the south and in the lowland. Then Judah went up against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. Now the name of Hebron was formerly Kirjath Arba. And it says, now notice this, and they killed Sheshai, Ahman, and Talmai. Very interesting. You know what? Well, when you compare this to Joshua, and I think we should, it would be important. Joshua chapter 10. Let's look at Joshua 10, verse 36. And it reads, it says, so Joshua went up against Eglon, and all Israel with him, to Hebron, and they fought against it. Did you notice that? It said all Israel with him. If you've been with us in our studies, we've been looking so far in the first couple verses of chapter 1 of Judges. It's just been Judah and Simeon. But we said last week that they're just the tip of the spear. Again, the book of Judges is thematic. It doesn't give you every bit of information. But it's very interesting how it points out Judah and Simeon. And we're going to get to that. You know, there's not one wasted word in Scripture. Everything there is for a reason, and smarter men than I have always said that God rewards the diligent. When you're diligent in your studies, you're going to be rewarded for it. Right now in this presentation, I'm just going to go over it quickly. In church this past Sunday, yesterday, I think we spent hours on it, an hour and a couple of minutes. I only have just a few minutes, so I'm going to try to keep it light and sweet for you. I hope you like your coffee, with cream and sugar. Anyways, Joshua chapter 11, verse 21 talks about this very same thing. Joshua 11:21 records, it says, and at that time Joshua came and cut off the Anakim from the mountains, from Hebron, from Debir, from Anab, and from all the mountains of Judah, and from all the mountains of Israel. Joshua utterly destroyed them with their cities. And again, we see it in chapter 15, verse 31. And if this is, as we read it in Judges chapter 1, verses 9 and 10, remember we just saw that, and I believe this is the same account. And if these are indeed the same events, then we notice the stark contrast in the narrative. Again, Judges is thematic. It's history, but it is not all-inclusive. And when I say it's a theme, it is a history book, but it's going to paint a picture, and we're just starting to get into the book. But I want you to be aware of that. Although it's history, it's telling a story. It's giving us a theme for our encouragement, for a warning, and it also serves as an example. We talked about this before, but it's important to always realize this when we're reading this book so you don't get confused on your studies. Always keep this in the back of your mind, okay? So Judges 1, verses 11 through 15. From there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. There's that name again. It says, now, the name of Debir was formerly Kirjath Sepher. Then Caleb said, whoever attacks Kirjath Sepher and takes it, to him I will give my daughter Ashaz as wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, he took it. So he gave him his daughter for Ashaz as wife. Now it happened when she came to him that she urged him to ask her father for a field. And she dismounted from her donkey, and Caleb said, what do you want? So she said to him, give me a blessing. Since you have given me this land in the south, give me also the springs of water. Interesting. Although Judges is thematic, it's not all-inclusive, I found it very intriguing that this account of what we just read is almost word for word what we saw back in Joshua chapter 15, verses 15 through 19. to me, curious as to why this innocuous account is repeated here, I dug a little deeper. To me, it seems like, okay, so what? But again, God rewards the diligent. Did you know that the name Debir, it means sanctuary in Hebrew? You see how they just took over that city of Kirjath Sefer and they named it Debir. Interesting, it means sanctuary. Now, this town had two names prior to that. One was Kirjath Sefer. Remember, we just read it. That means town of books. The other name that was given is said Kirjath Shana or Shanhe, whatever. That means town of scribes. So we see this was a very important city, town of books, town of scribes. It kind of be like a college town, like it's an important city, town of books, town of scribes. It was very important for both culture, okay, but it also had a very high strategic value. I've studied, I researched this because I'm thinking, well, why is this here, word for word? And in my studies, I've learned that Debir is a city about the size of Jericho. It's situated 3,040 feet above sea level in a region devoid of trees, and it's situated right on a major trade route. The city was very well fortified, and as we just read it, earlier it says it was inhabited by the Anakim. Now, it's interesting. The history of the Anakim, look this up. These people were really tall, okay? And as a people, they were divided into 3 tribes. Israel's divided into 12 tribes. 12 brothers, 12 tribes. The Anakim, the sons of Anak, descendants after years and years, they split off into 3 tribes, known as the Anakim. But interesting here that the leaders of these 3 tribes individually, one leader was Ehman, the other one was Sheshai, and the other was Talmai. Those 3 people back in verse, what was it, verse 10 that were killed, they were each individual leaders to the individual tribes. Interesting. So you see, this battle, this taking the city of Debir was a major victory. Not only was it a morale booster for Israel, it was a morale breaker for the Canaanites. Now, we already discussed about who the Canaanites were and the importance of everything here. Backstory. It's important to realize this, to remember it, because we're always confronted with questions. I don't know why. Maybe it's just human nature. Maybe it's Satan tries to always get us to doubt the Word. There's so many people say that you can't believe the Bible because it contradicts itself. No, it doesn't. If you just realize, we're going to get into that more in depth in the weeks to come. But please, just the real story here to me in verses 11 through 15 was not so much this. It was a great battle. And not so much this was a very important town. It was a very important victory and an important defeat. The city itself was very interesting. It had a lot of history, a lot of culture, and so on and so forth. But to me, like I said earlier, the main story here is Ashaz, the woman there herself. Why she wanted the region so badly. Badly enough that she broke tradition. You notice that she got down off her donkey. And I can almost see it now. She's probably standing there tapping her foot, or otherwise throwing a fit, or just acting like a spoiled brat, or just, I'm reading too much into it. But she did break tradition. Women back then were more subjective to the male wishes, like the Eastern culture now. You look at the Muslims. The women don't have a word in anything. They are just basically slaves. The Israelites were not exactly the same, but very similar. women had more value in Israeli culture than they do in Muslim culture, even to this day. But again, it's very important that this woman broke tradition and wanted this city so badly. What do we make of that? I don't know. I don't know. The fact that, the town of Debir, formerly known as Karath Sefer or Karath Shana, its region, its topology and geography is very, is very strategic. They had a high cultural value, but there's something here. And as I said before, the Lord always rewards diligence. And I suspect that we're going to come back and we're going to revisit this later. That's why I'm throwing this out here to get you to think first. Hopefully I'll get you to study and look it up for yourself. I really think we're going to come back to this later. But having said that, let's move on. Judges 1 verse 16, okay? Now the children of the Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up from the city of palms with the children of Judah into the wilderness of Judah, which lies in the south, near Arad. And they went and dwelt among the people. The children of the Kenite. Who were they? Interesting. I did my homework there as well. We just read that they're Moses' father-in-law's tribe. But these are the same people, and the Midianites, I hope I pronounced that correctly. The children of the Kenite are a branch of the Midianites that we've seen in Numbers chapter 24, verses 21 and 22. But it's not the same people, it's not the same Midianites as mentioned in Genesis 15, verses 18 through 21. Look those passages up because it's very important. We're going to come right back to that. But guess who the Midianites are? Guess who the children of the Kenite are? They're still Canaanites. They're still descendants of Ham, who was Noah's son, who had, and we talked about this last week or the week before, who had pretty much a curse set on them, who were pretty much given their role. And we're going to see as this progresses, as this all plays out, prophecy is fulfilled, and it's I love it. You got to feel bad for the Canaanites, but I just love how the picture all comes together. When you understand and when you read and when you let the Bible interpret the Bible, it can't be confusing at all. But again, back to the children of the Kenite. I said it was very interesting that this was the same people as mentioned in Numbers 24. Why do I say that? Read that chapter, and you'll see. Any Christian out there probably heard of the prophet Balaam. He's the guy that had the donkey talking to him. He's the guy that pretty much turned out to be preaching for profit. He was a prophet, and then he gave that up. He started just preaching for profit. Sunday I really went into this. It breaks my heart. But it's also, and again, the book of Judges, we talked about similarities. That's an underlying theme all throughout the book. But again, the similarities are striking. They smack you in the face. They're staring right at you. And I made a big production of this because it really breaks my heart. Let's just move on, otherwise I'll cry. Here in verse 16, we see a mention of the city of palms. Do you know where that is? Again, God always rewards the diligent. So looking ahead, we're going to see in Judges chapter 3, verse 13, the city of palms is identified as Jericho. Looking backwards, the city of palms is identified as Jericho in Deuteronomy chapter 34, verse 3. I thought that was cool. The city of palms. Well, why didn't you say it here in verse 16? Why does it just say Jericho? Again, God always rewards the diligent. It's just like, it's like the prize in the bottom of a Cracker Jack box. And when you find this yourself, it's like, ah, I love it. But it's interesting to me, again, and I don't like it so much, that it says that they dwelled among the Israelites. We're going to talk about that in a few minutes, so don't let that get away from you. Well, let's just move on because I'm already running out of time. Judges 1, verses 17 through 19. And again, this is just a quick recap of what we went over on Sunday. I'm going to make, again, also available the audio from that sermon. That's probably more in-depth, more verbose. Hopefully it packs a punch. We're just going over this quickly because I like to make the video. It gives it a more personal feel. I don't have coffee, so I'm sharing a Monster with you. I know for the religious people out there, oh, it's the drink of the devil. Rabbit trail. Don't make me go there. Anyways, so Judges 1, verse 17 through 19 says, "And Judah went with his brother Simeon, and they attacked the Canaanites who inhabited Ziphath and utterly destroyed it. So the name of the city was called Hormah. And Judah took Gaza with its territory, Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territories. So the Lord was with Judah, and they drove out the mountaineers. But they could not drive out the inhabitants of the lowland because they had chariots of fire." And no, chariots of iron. Just making sure you're paying attention. This is deep. I only have a little bit of time, so I'm going to speak quickly. Hear what we're reading. It's very deep for a lot of reasons. Number one, we see that it's still largely what we're reading here. It's still a two-brother campaign. It's still Judah and Simeon. And the importance of that we talked about when we first opened up this book. It's so still essentially this is still a two-tribe campaign, or we just saw in Joshua that all of Israel was with them. So you can look at this as like Judah and the Simeon were like the Marines, okay? They went first. But they're given credit here. They're mentioned by name. God always rewards the diligent. Also, did you know that when they renamed these towns, that the one that they renamed Hormah, in Hebrew, it means utter destruction. That tells you something right there. So when they fought and they took this city, they utterly destroyed it. Now, I want to read you something that when I study, I look at all a bunch of different commentators, good, bad, in between. I'm non-denominational, so I read a lot of different things from, Calvinists and Arminians and the Baptist and the whoever. None of that means anything to me. I'm not religious. I have a relationship with the Lord. It's not religion. But this one guy, he's really, really good, and he wrote on this on Judges 1, verse 19, and I like this so much I want to share it with you. The commentator says, and I quote, "This reads as if Jehovah could not defeat the inhabitants of the valley because they had chariots of iron. But maybe not, because, number one, the first part of verse 19 reads, 'And the Lord was with Judah.' That should have been the ending of verse 18, he says, showing the reason for the success in the conquering of the 8 cities of verses 4 through 18. The rest of verse 19 refers to another time when Judah failed God, and therefore he, God, withdrew his support in the effort to drive out the Canaanites. If God had been with Judah in this effort, they would have won, like in verses 4 through 18. Yeah. Secondly, he goes on, he says, some books read, or some versions of the Bible, he says some codices read verse 19 as did not instead of could not, showing that Judah failed because they were afraid of the iron chariots. It shows distrust and a lack of simple and firm reliance on God and his promises. The other verses in this chapter expressing failure read did not or neither did, proving that verse 19 to mean did not. The third point this commentator raises, he says various translations make this verse clearer. In the Rotherham it reads, quote, took possession of the hill country, but did not possess the inhabitants of the vale, unquote. Not because God was powerless, but because they did not put forth the proper effort. The Septuagint reads, he, Judah, took possession of the mountain, for they were not enabled to drive out the inhabitants of the vale, because Rechab dissuaded them. Jonathan ben Uzziel, he's a pretty famous Jewish guy, rabbi, I believe. He says, and I quote, he says, they kicked out the inhabitants of the mountains, but afterwards when they sinned, they were not able to kick out the inhabitants of the plains because they had chariots of iron. I agree with that, because in my mind's eye, I'm looking at like the difference between Jericho and Ai, or Ai. If you know Israel's history, you know that they fought a major battle in Jericho. All odds were against them, and God, told them how pretty much to defeat the town, and they were obedient. They did exactly what God told them, and the walls came tumbling down. You probably sung this song in Sunday school if you went. They fought, and they won a major victory in a well-fortified city, a mega structure, if you will, a colossal wall, impenetrable. And they beat it. They took it without effort, seemingly. But then they go to Ai, or Ai was like a little ragtag town, like maybe say Green. They go from taking Los Angeles, huge city, and they come to Green, New York, and they get it handed to them. And we know why. Because the sin was in the camp. We read the Bible, right? We know the story. One guy, they were commanded, you take this first city, and there's a reason for it. And you probably already know this, but don't take any spoils for yourself. One guy took a robe and some pieces of silver, and he hid it. But it doesn't matter what he took. He could have took, 55 billion pieces of gold and hidden it. It doesn't matter what. He could have took a sandal. It doesn't matter. He sinned. He was disobedient. And that's why they, the town of Green kicked their butt. Ai. So, anyways, I found that all very intriguing and very interesting. But again, in verse 19, we will notice that we're still in chapter 1. We're only on verse 19. There's 21 chapters? Chapter 1, verse 19 is the last mention for Judah and Simeon that says, and the Lord was with them. For the rest of the time, the Lord wasn't with them. Remember that, because in the book of Judges is none too pretty. Because the Lord wasn't with them. And from verse 19 on, we see that victories give way to defeat. We see the compromise. And this is a very excellent study, and I'm glad you're along for the ride. But why we're doing this, there's 3 points that I want to make out of this. And we read this commentator, what he had to say. Here's what I'm thinking. You know me, I color outside of the lines. I think outside of the box. But when I'm looking at Judah, now remember I said it's important to understand, to have in your back pocket Genesis chapter 49 and 48. Because here's the backstory. This is what reads, this all ties together perfectly. In Genesis chapter 49, I'm going to turn there quickly. Verses 8 through 12, we see Jacob is giving blessings to his sons. Now he has 12 sons, but in chapter 48, he's giving a blessing blessing to his grandsons. And that's going to come back. We're going to look at that maybe in 2 weeks' time. But for now, for tonight, Genesis chapter 49, verses 8 through 12, Jacob is blessing Judah. And he says, and I quote, "Judah, you are he whom your brothers shall praise. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's children shall bow down before you." Judah is a lion's whelp. It goes on. He's proclaiming Judah to be strong. He goes on to say that, rulers are going to come out of you, and until Shiloh comes, you're going to be like, the A number one. You're going to be the seat of power for Israel. Interesting. Here, many years later, after Jacob is given his blessing, it's so interesting, prophetic, if not poetic, justice that Judah is the tip of the spear. Judah is a lion's whelp. Judah is their strength. Interesting. But also interesting to me, we've seen how Judah went to Simeon and said, "Hey, I want you to come along for the ride. Help me out. And then, I'll help you out." We talked about that. But interestingly enough, Simeon is given a blessing here in the same chapter, verses 5 through 7. Jacob says, and I quote, it says, "Simeon and Levi's are brothers. Instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council. Let not my house be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox." And it says, "Cursed by their anger." Israel's coming into the land. And I'm seeing all the time, and I'm going to say again that it's Old Testament, but this applies to America today. This applies to the church today. This is very profound, because we see that when you mix strength with weakness, when you mingle blessing with cursing, the outcome's not good. Chapter 1, verse 19, we see that the Lord was not with them. Why? Because this one guy was saying because this one Rechab dissuaded them. When you have the weak dissuading the strong from doing what they're told to do, call it political correctness, you're doomed. Political correctness is it's not good. Why do we strive so bad to be politically correct when it's going to be our end? It's going to be our doom. It's going to I have so much to say, and I've only got so much time. I do want to carry this over and apply it to today's church. What we're seeing here: blessing with cursing, strength with weakness. Let's carry that over to today's church. And for sake of time, I'm just going to read this and let you think what you want, okay? Be it for better or for worse, but I just want God to work in your heart. Not the words of man, but the word of God. And the word of God never comes back void. Tie this all together. Put a little bow on it. 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verses 11 through 18, in light of what we're studying today in the book of Judges. Paul writes to the Corinthians, and he says, "Oh, Corinthians, we have spoken openly to you. Our heart is wide open. You are not restricted by us, but you are restricted by your own affections. Now, in return for the same, I speak as to children, you also be open. Do not be unequally yoked together with unbelievers. For what fellowship has righteousness with lawlessness? And what communion has light with darkness? And what accord has Christ with Belial? Or what part has a believer with an unbeliever? And what agreement has the temple of God with idols? for you are the temple of the living God. And as God has said, I will dwell in them and I will walk among them. I will be their God and they shall be my people. Therefore, verse 17, it says, come out from among them and be separate, says the Lord. Do not touch what is unclean, and I will receive you. I will be a father to you, and you will be my sons and daughters, says the Lord Almighty. In the name of political correctness, in the name of whatever you want to call it, put a label on, we took something so easy and made it so hard. We took a relationship and made a religion out of it. When we study the book of Judges, and I've said this in all the other times together, and if you please, if this is your first time, I encourage you to go back and look at the other installments because there's so much here. We're only on verse 19 and this is week 4. I want you to get something from this. I want you to understand. I want you to learn and to grow. You see, Judges is more than a historical narrative. It's a prophetic example. It's a prophetic warning. But it's also, and this is my prayer, it will serve as a prophetic encouragement to the church today. Unfortunately, this message, it's lost on the church today. Now we have, just like the prophet of Baal, preaching for profit, prophesying for money, for filthy lucre, the Bible calls it. It also says that the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. And in church today, don't we just love our money? Don't get me going. I feel a sermon coming on. I'm not a preacher. I'm not a teacher. I'm just like you. You're just like me. We're no better than anybody. But I'm hoping that we can learn something from God and not from man. in the Old Testament, of all places. Church, wake up. Well, let's just go on, or I can make a sermon out of this. Judges 1 verses, let's read 20 and 21. Picking it up in the middle of a paragraph, and it says in verse 20, and they gave Hebron to Caleb, as Moses had said. Then he expelled from there the 3 sons of Anak. But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who inhabited Jerusalem. So the Jebusites dwell with the children of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. Now if you let me, and I'm famous for rabbit trails, there's an excellent rabbit trail right here. As I said before, the sons of Anak were really tall. How that come to be is not here nor there. But what I do think is pretty cool that I feel safe to talk to you about today. If you remember just verse 10 we just looked at a couple of minutes ago, and it says, then Judah went out against the Canaanites who dwelt in Hebron. And it says, and they killed Shishai, Ammon, and Talmai. And I told you these were the 3 leaders of the Anakim. You notice that? Verse 10, and now we're in verse 20. Again, it's thematic and it's narrative. It's not chronological. If you read this, and you're probably thinking, oh, it's 2 different. No. And we're going to be going over this for the next couple of weeks. I just want you to understand it's thematic and it's narrative. It's not so much a history book, although it is Israel's history. The purpose of the book of Judges is not so much a history lesson. It's more of a sermon. Now, if you want a history, then you go back to Joshua. That's more chronological. But both these books are covering the same time. And if you were with us for the book of the overview of the book of Judges, I'm going to throw this out there because this is good stuff. And it's true that the book of Judges and the book of Ruth in its original form were one book. And it wasn't, chapter and verse. It was just all one big long letter. Judges and Ruth were one book in its original form. Did you know that? If you were with us before, yeah, you've heard that. But what we just read here in verses 20 through 21, and he gave Hebron to Caleb, and Moses said, and they expelled from there the 3 sons of Anak, and so on and so forth. And wait, back up. But the children of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites. There's Benjamin. We're going to look at this more next week. Benjamin, no, let's do that now. Let's do that now. Where is he? He's in Genesis chapter 49, I believe. Get there quickly. Genesis 49. Where are you, Benjamin? I think he was one of the last guys. Yeah, verse 27. Benjamin, in Jacob's blessings, and he heard his last words to his son. He says, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. Now the Benjamins did not drive out the Jebusites, and they're together today in Jerusalem. Now look at Jerusalem today. Is there peace and harmony? Interesting. We're going to revisit that all throughout the book of Judges, so I'm just throwing that out there for you now. But interesting to me, I don't know how to say this quickly, so I'll just say it quickly. There's a huge difference from what we just read, how the Benjamin didn't drive out the Jebusites, and now they all live happily ever after. No. They were disobedient to the word, to God himself back in Exodus. In Exodus chapter 23, verses 32 and 33, God himself is speaking. And he says, you shall make no covenant with them, no promises, no deals. You shall make no covenant with them, nor with their gods. They shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. For if you serve their gods, it will surely be a snare to you. I'm just throwing that out there now. We're going to talk about that for weeks to come. So just put that in your mind. I'm running out of time, and I still got so much to cover. Let's just do it quickly, I guess. Judges chapter 1, verses 22 through 26. I wish you were with us at church yesterday. Hopefully I did this a little better than now. But 22, and again I'm reading from the New King James. It says, and the house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. You hear that? So the house of Joseph sent men to spy Bethel, and the name of the city was formerly Luz. And when the spies saw a man coming out of the city, they said to him, please show us the entrance to the city, and we will show you mercy. So he showed them and the entrance to the city, and they struck the city with the edge of the sword. But they let the man and all his family go. And the man went to the land of the Hittites, built a city, and called its name Luz, which is its name to this day. I'm just going to end here, but we're going to pick it up next week in these very same verses. So I don't want to get into that too much now. We're going to look at it so much more closely next week. But what we just saw there, I want to close with Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 10 through 19. This is a caution against disobedience. And it says, so it shall be when the Lord your God brings you into the land of which he swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, to Jacob, to give you large and beautiful cities which you did not build, houses full of good things which you did not fill, hewn out wells which you did not dig, vineyards and olive trees which you did not plant. When you have eaten and are full, then beware, lest you forget the Lord, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, from the house of bondage. You shall fear the Lord your God and serve him, and shall take oaths in his name. You shall not go after other gods, the gods of the peoples who are all around you. For the Lord your God is a jealous God among you, lest the anger of the Lord your God be aroused against you and destroy you from the face of the earth. You shall not tempt the Lord your God as you tempted him in Massah. You shall diligently keep the commandments of the Lord your God, his testimonies, and his statutes, which he has commanded you. And you shall do what is right and good in the sight of the Lord, that it may be well with you, and that you may go in and possess the good land of which the Lord swore to your fathers, to cast out all your enemies from before you, as the Lord has spoken. God's promises to Abraham, Isaac, and to Jacob are being fulfilled now to all their descendants. What we just saw here, God was reminding them. He gave them promises as well. They were conditional promises, conditional covenants. He says, if you do this, I'll do that. If you do that, I'll do this. Easy enough, right? Israel, as we're seeing here, and now we're going to talk about this later next week, but now the house of Joseph is coming in and not doing that, and they're not doing this. Again, I said before that Judges is a tragic sequel to the book of Joshua, inasmuch as that in Joshua still Israel was largely obedient to the Lord, and now here in Judges we're seeing how they are largely disobedient to God. And we're about halfway through the first chapter. But already you're seeing the theme here, right? Again, Exodus 32 verses 33, we saw that earlier. Conditional promises. Warnings. Pretty much giving them a roadmap. You know, who was it? Head East sang a song. I don't know why I throw this out there. It says, if you want to get to heaven, you know, if you want to drink some water, you got to dig a well. I don't know why I'm saying that. I don't know why that thought just came to my head. But the point is, it's a conditional thing. Israel's not following the conditions. And we're going to look at more. We're just started to look at verses 22 through 26. We're going to pick it up there next week. But think about Deuteronomy chapter 6, 10 through 19. Conditional promises. The Old Covenant. The Lord also makes unconditional promises. He says, you don't have to do anything, but I promise you this. I promise you that. You don't need to do anything. That's an unconditional promise. Remember that, please. We can talk about it more in depth. But I want you to understand, a lot of people are saying, oh, the book of Judges or the Bible, it's such a bloody book. You serve a bloody God and a God of war and hatred and blah, blah, blah. They don't know what they're talking about, so don't listen to that, okay? Think for yourselves. Conditional promises. And we see that the Lord had already promised this land, and He already gave the conditions, and we highlighted it there in Deuteronomy chapter 6. He's saying, I'm going to bring you into this land. I'm going to give you all this. Because He promised it to Abraham. He promised it to Isaac, to Jacob. And He says, I'm going to bless you. The Lord also said, I will bless those who bless you. Speaking of, look that up. What's America doing today? We've talked about in future or past installments how the book of Judges is very applicable to the church today, to America today, because if you don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat it. That's going to be an underlying theme to this whole study. We started talking about that in the first 3 weeks, so I just threw it out there again. I'm already out of time, and I apologize for that. There's so much here. And I only hope and I pray that I'm whetting your appetite for further study, and I pray to God that you do it yourself. You don't need any esoteric knowledge. You don't need any grand poobah of the Royal Order of the Golden Goose from, whatever. No one with purple robes that needs to teach you. No one with a education. The 12 disciples, they were all, backwater fishermen. They didn't go to school. And they changed the world. So what makes you think that we have to go to some type of seminary to learn the Bible? This is written so plainly and so simply that even a child can understand it. The only thing that we need to do is just remove our pride, our conditions that we put on, okay, I'll let you be God if you do this for me, and so on and so forth. No, we don't put conditions on God. God is not a respecter of persons. Grace and love and mercy, it's all free. It's all free. I just hope that I didn't, lose you, and that you come back. And I do see that we only got 30 seconds left. So, anyways, we're studying the book of Judges. I hope that you continue to do so on your own at home. I hope that you continue to join me here, or even most importantly, you are all welcome to come visit us at Calvary Chapel Vestal Center. It's Route 26 in Vestal Center, New York. Look us up. No dress code needed. Bikers welcome, and we'd love to meet you. Hopefully, I'll see you there. Bye.